You're listening to the Coffee and Technology podcast brought to you by Cropster. In this episode, we speak with Michael Phillips. Michael Phillips is the Director of Global Education and Engagement at Blue Bottle Coffee. In this episode, we discuss his journey to the WBC, how coffee retail has evolved, and what the future could be for high-quality instant coffee. Enjoy.
Cool. Norbert, welcome back, man. It's exciting to be recording again after, a little break, a little pause, some traveling, and excited to see you virtually again.
Yeah, it's good to be back. I'm very excited about this one.
Yeah, no, with that, I'd like to welcome Michael Phillips of Blue Bottle. Michael, welcome to the podcast. It's an honor to have you here. You've been in the industry for quite some time now and with a lot of pedigree behind you, and excited to be talking to you today.
Well, thanks for having me. It's great. I've listened to a lot of what you folks put out. Really good content, really interesting people. It's podcasting's hard work, and I I appreciate that other people do it, so I get to reap the benefits. So thank you for that.
Cool.
Thank you. We appreciate the kind words. No, if we maybe just get started. Right now we know you as Michael Phillips, a Blue Bottle Director of Education, but I also know you're past World Barista Champion, and I'd love to hear a little bit about the journey of a little bit how you got into coffee, but how basically really what took you from when you won World Barista the BBC to where you're at now in Blue Bottle. I'm sure it's a fascinating journey.
Yeah, absolutely. It is literally over a decade ago now, almost getting to 2. So a lot of stuff snuck in there. But I went to college. The preamble. I went to college for digital cinema, thinking I wanted to work in film and all of that stuff. And then I started to do it, and I realized that I just utterly hated it. But at least I hated working in sets. So I was getting like commercial work, and I didn't even own a TV. Hate commercials, and it just wasn't fulfilling the creative niche that you dream of when you're in college going for a film degree. But that whole time I was falling more and more in love with coffee. So I just hit a breaking point. And I sold all of my camera equipment and my lights and everything that I had built up to that point, and bought a home roaster and a little prosumer dual boiler espresso machine and Mazzer Mini. And I was like, I'm going to learn how to do this. This will be my new life. It'll be wonderful, that romantic dream. And it was great. I couldn't get a job anywhere. No one would hire me. In Minneapolis, I was just this dorky late 20s white guy coming in asking them about like their brew recipes, and they're like, you have no tattoos, you don't look cool at all. So eventually I gave up on that because it was going nowhere. And I went to go see a barista competition in Chicago. A partner of mine at the time was traveling through, and she's like, hey, you got to come check this out. Drive out, pick me up here, and then we'll head back home. And I did it, and I fell in love. Intelligentsia hosted it. This was in 2005, I think.
Okay.
So I drove down there, and I saw the event, and I got to meet all these. It was like walking into an issue of Barista magazine, because Intelli had that stable of top tier competitive baristas back then. So meeting Amber Saylor and Matt Riddle and Stephen Rogers and all these folks back then was really great. And I was like, this is what I want to do. So I went back home, and I would just scour online for job postings, and something opened up in the production department there. And at that point in time, I also thought I wanted to be a coffee roaster. So I moved out, and they're like, yeah, you got the job. You can get here in a month. Did that, got out there, and just worked on one of the most grueling production floors I've ever been on. Intelligentsia was going gangbusters back then, right? Because it was still kind of those early days when specialty was like, there weren't a lot of people doing it, right? And those that were able to just really clean house. So I worked in production. I saw the roasting going on and all that. But they let me start practicing for the in-house competition on the side if I wanted to. Anybody could compete at Intelli, even some guy putting beans in bags and boxes on trucks. So I did that, and I actually did really well. I got to go to the regional, and from there to the national. Like that first year, having never worked in a coffee shop, I took 13th in the national, which was better than like one of their trainers did. And it was like, so I was like, maybe I should work in the cafes, and migrated there, and then worked my way up through the chain at Intelligentsia until, the first USBC title happened. And then the year after that, the second in the world title in London. And that basically was a huge inflection point where all sorts of doors open up when you get that kind of experience. And it was magical. It was great. I became Intelligentsia's director of training at that point. And, they were opening all sorts of stuff in California, and there's all these different invites around the world to experience, giving lectures and seeing coffee production on that end. But it was getting very, like, Intelligentsia was growing really fast. And for me, I felt some of the strains inside of it, and just wanted to go to something smaller, something simple. So about a year after winning the title, myself and two other coffee professionals stepped out of Intelligentsia to start Handsome Coffee in downtown Los Angeles. And that was a huge, terrifying move. Intelligentsia treated me well. It was the highest paying job I'd ever had in my life, ever dreamed of having in my life. And I left it to be broke, more or less, sharing a 600-foot apartment with another grown man. But it was super magical. Handsome was a very different concept at the point, for the US at least. We stole a whole bunch of great ideas from other people. We took that menu that Gwillem was doing of just espresso and milk in different sizes, and we kind of got over the sacred cow pretty early of pour over being the future. We went to batch brew, which everybody was shocked about back in 2010. We didn't have coffee or chocolate we didn't have sugar for coffee anywhere in the bar, and all those different things that got a lot of attention, but helped start a conversation. So Handsome was a really interesting step in that it changed a lot of conventions as to how we were making coffee and what we we're talking about. But it was also much more eye-opening, and having to be a business owner and actually be pragmatic, and not just like a barista who can tell a business owner, like, hey, we want to do the most rigorous standards in our cafe, and we want to train people for 6 months before they get to pull shots on their own. It's very easy to be an idealistic barista when you're not managing the P&L. So Handsome kind of burned a lot of that into my psyche as well, about how functional training needs to be, aside from just geared towards perfection. And then 2014 came along, and that is when we sold Handsome to Blue Bottle Coffee as they entered into that market. The company had a great run. We had a lot of internal strife that we're trying to figure out how to deal with. Then honestly, that was kind of a best case scenario at the moment. Neither of the other founders came with me, but I joined Blue Bottle with the idea that I would go into the training department, and that's what happened. And that's a whole other chapter of wild rides, as I've been with Blue Bottle about 8 years now. I've held a ton of different roles, had a lot of great experiences. So that was very rambly. I'm not sure if I
amazing. No, it's amazing.
Question out there.
I remember all those steps. I remember being there and on the outskirts, lurking, and I remember my first visit to Handsome, of course, and the roaster was almost to be connected, and all the things with connecting a burning machine in Los Angeles is not that easy. And
I remember it, we kind of shared the new concept with the world at SCA in Houston, I think. it was that year. It was the year Pete Licata won the USBC before the Worlds, like a year or so before. Anyways, we were in Texas for that, and we were looking around, right? We didn't have a roaster secured, so we went to Probot, their booth, and we're like, yeah, we're looking to start a roaster up in California. What do you recommend? What should we do? Should we go refurbish? Should we get one of these? And they're like, have you ever thought about moving to Nevada? They're just like, because they're like, they don't permit roasters in LA anymore. That's good luck. That's a very steep hill to climb. But
Yeah.
we got lucky. Everything kind of came together. It was definitely dicey for a minute, but it's in place now, and it was great.
So I'm curious, a lot of what you were saying in your story is it seems like you have this passion or this interest in educating and like teaching people and due to like, structure and process. I'm curious to know, like, what is it about the idea of like education and coffee that fascinates you most? Like, what is it that drives you, and why you have like this passion for that specific part of what you do?
I mean, I think it's because it's like, it's my own passion, right? My own, like, if you take one of those weird personality tests, that says who you are and what your archetype is, like, I am a learner. Like, I love to learn new things, to the point where I'm almost kind of a flake about it, right? Like, I will go so deep into a new topic and I'll learn everything and I'll like get really invested. But then once I feel like I've gotten a certain amount of depth into it, a lot of times I'll just get distracted by something else. I learn everything I can, and then it's like, well, I could go into doing a big thing with it, or I could just go learn something else. So I have bounced around with that a little bit, but coffee is one of the few things that's really been able to hold that attention, and part of it is the ability to share that joy of learning, because I feel like coffee is unique in some ways for education, in that I'm never introducing someone to coffee. Everybody comes to you having had coffee like for decades in their life. They've been drinking it, consuming it, experiencing it. So you're not showing them something brand new, but what's even better is you're showing them something, this magical sort of unseen side to something that they thought they knew. So that experience is always just so rewarding. And anybody coming to a coffee education class is already, they're kind of invested in the idea of it a little bit, and they're open to the wonders. So a lot of education, you're dealing with happy people that are getting to do something that they're excited about. So I feed on that energy, and it also feeds into my desire to learn more. I firmly believe, like, there's only so much you can learn just studying on your own. At some point, you kind of start to plateau, and teaching what you've been practicing is the way to move to that next step. When you actually have to like put it into words and help someone understand these concepts, it builds them into your own practice in a much more foundational way.
That's very interesting what you say in terms of like the learning journey you create. And you said, well, I learned something and then I kind of know, and then I move on, and then I learn something else. Now, looking back at those last 15, 20 years, a lot has changed. A lot has evolved. How do you deal? So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about that evolvement of brew recipes and brewing coffee in general, but also your personal experience with learning something and then letting go of that learning because something else and something new came along, which potentially challenges what you have learned before.
Yeah. No, it's so I'm a newly minted husband, and my wife and we took a trip up to Seattle over the 4th to see some of her friends and just have a little extra celebration in there. But like, coffee tourism is a thing, right? It's like a whole industry now, it feels like. But I'm sure us three have probably been doing it well before it was on eaters top 10 lists. So we go to Seattle, and I think we were there for 5 days, and we probably went to like 14 coffee shops. But one of them that I went to, like, it was just a time capsule. I walk in, there's 3 people on bar, they've got a clack grinder, and just seeing, like, it was just like a PTSD triggered moment, just seeing this barista going gets like a full
That's so good. I
mound,
still have a few of those here. Yeah.
takes the lid off the dosing chamber, like swipes the top of the mound back into the chamber, and then like has the tamper on top of the machine, and it just goes like all these things that, like, I remember those days, that when I started in coffee, like the process for pulling a shot of espresso was very different. Like maybe you training with a scale for espresso back then meant tamping on a bathroom scale to make sure you hit 30 pounds, or 15 pounds for the first tamp and 30 for the second tamp if you were really in the know. So it's just like everything was different back then. It was all by eye. Espresso was still voodoo magic. Like every person that got on to shots had to redial in, right? And like that was commonly accepted, that like, oh, a new barista's on bar, they're gonna have to change the dial to match their individual technique, how hard they tamp, like all these other different things that were just like ingrained in us. It's like going back to the time where early civilization would see a mountain spewing lava out, and they were pretty convinced there was an angry god underneath it. That's like, that was the level of espresso understanding back then. You would just create excuses for outcomes because you didn't know any better, and you needed some reason to latch onto so you didn't go insane. So we've come a long way since then. For me, that was my start. I would knock the side of the portafilter with my tamper because that's what the trainer said, and that's what their trainer said, and that's what their trainer said. It was all oral tradition. It was all craft. But I really feel like I was fortunate in that I came in on the tail end of that. And I came in at a company that was like determined to win, right? Like Intelligentsia at that point in time was like, Doug Zell might as well have been the owner of a NASCAR team. He was just like, we're going to get this. We're going to get the best equipment. We're going to get the best pit crew. We're going to do all these things. So like, even though we were still guilty of all those sort of poor practices, we're constantly looking for ways to get better at it. And there's always new talent coming in. Like I remember the pretty big inflection point when Intelligentsia decided to go to the West Coast, and they brought in Kyle Glanville and Tony Konechny and that whole crew, and they spurred a bunch of ideas as well. So, going from there, bringing in metrics, things you can measure, actual testable results, empirical data, all that good stuff, just started landing everywhere in the process, from brewed coffee to espresso to milk. And I lived for it. That scratched my learning side really well, because then you could start to build out testable processes, and you could create a training structure for people. And there's this idea that we could white knuckle our way into perfection just by controlling every aspect of it. And we did pretty well. But that early iteration of growth through technological investments and sort of studying that process had its downsides too. That was that idealistic barista moment where it's like, no, we can't have this guy pulling shots. He's only been here for 2 months. He's still tamping at wildly different pressures every time. In dosing, I checked his doses. His variation is like 0.7 grams. It's like, there's no way. He's got to go through more training. And then the poor cafe manager is like, we have no one you've agreed to certify to make espresso.
And where do you think we stand now on that development? Are we having now general accepted rules of how things are, or is it still a little bit wild westish in a certain sense?
Well, I mean, we had generally accepted rules back then too. They were just more guidelines, right? Like it was generally accepted that you stopped a shot once you saw the stream starting to get blonde, right? It was generally accepted that you didn't want grounds on the upper ridge inside of the portafilter, which is why you had to knock it with your tamper to get them to fall down and then tamp it. Like, there was codified, generally understood rules among better cafes. They're just wrong. And I think it's hubris for us to think that the general codified rules we have now are all absolutely right and unquestionable. But I mean, the good thing is I don't think for the most part a lot of people do. And there's definitely like the challenge is like the newer you are to espresso, like the second you start to, or specialty in general, like when you're early on in that learning journey and it's just this whole crazy new wide world, everything you learn feels like, you've unlocked a secret that the rest of the world doesn't know. And then all of a sudden for you, that secret is the rule. Whereas people who have been doing this for a little while longer, they realize that that's just a temporary point of understanding that we're at right now, and it'll probably change. And we got to be open to that change. But yeah, I feel like at this point, there are some really solid accepted guidelines. There's so much more content around training that people are able to share. The thing that I like about right now is that it feels like we've identified a lot of like really powerful tools for setting standards. And now a lot of the questioning is coming around, how do we use those tools, to create different schools of thought, right? So Blue Bottle is a very specific school of thought when it comes to a number of things around coffee preparation. And that school of thought is a direct reflection of how James prefers to make coffee. Like our recipe for espresso would blow most people's minds and be like, that's incredibly regressive. I can't believe you're doing that. Just because we have an inverted ratio in terms of dose and yield. But we're able to talk in terms of dose and yield and percent extraction. And we just have a school of thought that's at one point on the spectrum. Whereas, GMB or La Cabra or someone else is going to be at a different point, right? They're going to be using a much higher ratio of water to coffee. But we have the tools in place to at least communicate what those standards are in a transferable way. And we have the technology to allow us to be much more consistent in how we recreate these drinks. So, I can jump on to any bar at Blue Bottle and start pulling shots that were dialed in the way the previous barista had dialed them in and get somewhat similar results, because we have those controls in over what our dose is, over our puck preparation, over what our yield is, over what the time should be. So we can have that consistency in a way that was never possible before. And from a training standpoint, it's just light years better. You're not teaching people to guess. You're not saying, all right, you need to eye how much coffee is in that basket. You need to understand that, when it gets to this volume and it's really fresh, it's different from when it gets to that volume and it's older. A lot of those ambiguities are gone. We've got much more understandable metrics we can use with people, which, someone can get to the point in their coffee skills in a month that probably took me a year and a half when I first began.
So how important is the tamper, and like an automated tamper, which knocks out at 30 pounds or something? Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it a revolution?
Are you just trying to rile me up?
No, I just okay. I just went to Milan to the coffee shop and I just got one. So I haven't used it yet. Tell me, did I make a mistake?
Well, I mean, it all depends, and this is where I am probably incredibly frustrating for some people, because I have a hard time saying something is right and something is wrong. You know, there are many situations in which an automated tamper is absolutely the perfect choice. And then there's others where it's not. You know, it depends on what the goal is, you know, that you're trying to achieve. So for like automated tampers are a solution to very real challenges around the health sustainability of the profession, right? Tamping can be very detrimental to people's wrists and, you know, their general ability to keep being baristas in the long term. However, for us, so I did a test when we were looking at it at Blue Bottle. We got one of the puck press units that sits under K30, which is what we were using in the lab at that time. And we used bottomless portafilters. And, you know, we just ran through and pulled something like 150 shots with the puck press with manual. And we checked extraction percentages. And it wasn't even close for us. I don't know if part of that was because the bottomless portafilter, I think, is more of a struggle for that if we didn't have it set up. But like 150 shots on each side, we tried. You know, we had a pretty sharp team trying to do the work, and there's too much variation in what we're getting out. Now, there's an argument to be made that if you're primarily a high volume milk drink cafe, everything you're serving is 12 ounces or larger for the most part, and you just need to crank. That level of variation probably wouldn't be as perceptible in the final cup, and could be an amazing solution in terms of bar flow, speed of service, ease of training, all of those good things. However, if you're trying to sell a $10 shot of espresso and you're using waste distribution technique and you got all this stuff in place, I don't think that that's the next logical step in your bar flow process if you're trying to get the highest quality shot. But I hope, and I'm excited to be proven wrong. Like, all of these things they're just waiting to get better and better. So
yeah, it's really interesting you say that, because you know, obviously, like, you know, you did your due diligence, you collected the data, you analyzed the data of with 150 shots in your lab and whatnot. And it's interesting because, you know, one, I guess, question we've posed to like more roast focused guests before is like being able to balance data and beliefs, balancing like what you know and balancing what you find and what the technology says or what the data says. And it seems like to be that same kind of like balance you have to find in the cafe is like doing what you know, but also not being opposed or seeing what is the technology developed for, what does the data say, and then is it going to work for you or is it not, or it depends on, you know, your situation. So yeah, I mean, it's super fascinating that you can find that balance for sure.
Well, it's so hard in coffee because, you know, there's so much kind of romance and attachment tied up in how we make coffee, right? For a lot of people, even coffee professionals, it's that ritual, it's that skill set that, you know, we love, and it makes us feel special, right? Like we've got this thing that we can do, and the more technology chips away at that, like it's literally chipping away at some people's professional identity. You know, what is this skill that I've spent the last decade plus working on refining mean if now I can get a puck press and a Wally and a PB, and all of a sudden, you know, I don't need to do any of it. You know, it does all of that. So it's a challenge, I think, for a lot of folks to get past that mental mindset, you know, and I'm definitely in that camp, right? Like, it's hard for me to like see a lot of these things and be like, you know what, the way they're doing that, I don't think that's top quality, because in my mind, the best quality shot needs to be this, it needs to be this, needs to be this, which is how I've learned and how I've grown my knowledge to like be attached to this skill set I've developed. But who knows? Maybe Eversys is going to take over the world soon, and we're all just going to have to accept it.
I wanted to ask towards that direction, but I didn't dare. No, but I think the world is kind of evolving into that direction, not only in coffee, in any aspect. Machines are whatever the human did can now be done by a machine. So the human has to learn how to operate the machine, but still know or can focus on other things.
Yeah.
I think that's where you say, well, we have different coffees, we have different drinks we want to create, and not everything can be automatically adjusted by the machine. So knowing how to adjust the machine or using the right ingredients, I don't know, just some thoughts.
Yeah, well, and it's it's funny talking about all of this with you guys because I'm sure when it first hit the ground, a lot of people saw Cropster that same way. It's like, oh, it's going to take out the art, it's going to take out all of this, and it's going to be coffee by robots. But now, like, I don't know a single serious roaster that wouldn't have a fit if you tried to take away their Cropster support. Like, it's such an invaluable tool that's it hasn't taken away the art, it's just elevated what we can do with it. And hopefully the preparation side follows that path, right? And we're open to what this level of insight and automation and ability that technology brings in a way that lets us progress what a cafe experience can be for our guests.
It depends on the level where you go in, right? If it's supportive, I think there's a lot more to be done with automation, or with not automation, with support of the human. I just thought about the ABS system on the car. It's like, well, I feel an artisan driver by braking or using the brakes in a certain way under all kinds of conditions. Like, that's no fun. If a system can do that and know exactly if it's wet, if it's not wet, if it's curvy, whatever, and figures that out for me, I can be focusing my driving on something else. And maybe that's the same with roasters and the same with baristas. The ingredients in coffee are so complex. It's one of the most complex food items we have available in terms of chemical compounds, right? So there's endless opportunities, in my opinion, to still steer and be in charge.
Enjoying this episode of the Coffee and Technology Podcast? This podcast would not be possible without the support of Cropster. Whether it's tracking harvest yields, roastery and inventory management, or simply tracking brew recipes, Cropster Origin, Cropster Roast, and Cropster Cafe can help you streamline your workflows and help you operate more efficiently.
So, with all this information out there, like that you learn about, that you can share with the team at Blue Bottle and even at the end consumer, can you kind of like tell us, like, or compare and contrast a little bit about like the education on like a business level and a consumer level, how the way you approach internal education versus the way you would approach external education? What does that kind of look like from your perspective and maybe even the Blue Bottle perspective?
Yeah, certainly. And just to clarify, so I've held a lot of different roles at Blue Bottle. And the first one, and probably one of the longest ones, was as director of education, and that was focused exclusively on internal barista training. So I helped build out the markets and the systems and a lot of the equipment changes that went into the cafe, all those different things, cafe design, like that was all wrapped up in that role. But then I migrated over to, we were starting to open cafes pretty quickly. So I was doing new cafe openings, and that pulled me into that world. And I handed off director of training to the very talented team that had been built up. And then I moved from cafe openings to culture programs. So think Origin travel, SCA trips, higher end internal education, things like that. And then most recently, so now I'm the global director of education and engagement, which is a big fancy title, but it mostly involves making educational video content for our guests, and then also a lot of the other video work. So for our internal training, I am not currently the director of that team. I don't want to steal anyone's thunder there.
Okay. Okay.
But what I can speak to is that those are two very, very different groups with very, very specific needs. And what internal training looks like for a company like, say, Handsome Coffee versus Blue Bottle is insanely different. Like there are some common threads that go through it, but for Blue Bottle, we've got over 100 cafes. That's a lot of baristas in a lot of different markets, and the needs of a program like that, they shift a lot. So you're looking, two big things you're looking at for a company like us is you need consistency in a way that shifts from a small 2 to 3 cafe chain, right? We want people to go into a cafe in New York, cafe in LA, a cafe in Hong Kong, and when they order a cup of our Bella Donovan blend pour over, it tastes the same in each of those. That involves consistency in all departments, from our roasting teams in those different markets to how we staff, how we set standards, how we train. So consistency is a huge challenge, and that's a technology solution and a training solution. But then also speed of training and ability to train. So when I joined Blue Bottle, we were still just the Bay, New York, and LA. And we had centralized training labs, training teams. And, if you were hired for X Cafe, you would go to that training center for like, I think 6 to 8 total days spread over the course of a month or so. That trainer would coordinate with your in-cafe lead barista, to make sure the in-cafe portion of the training was worked out. But it was like, there is still this very centralized hub. As you start to get cafes further and further away from those training centers, that solution becomes very problematic. And the pace becomes problematic as well. I remember the first time we got to the point of having to open 2 cafes in the same market in the same month. It's like, how are we going to train 40 baristas in this one lab in this time frame? So figuring out how to do that speed, and then also the turnover, right? If you have 15 cafes in a market, even if you have good employee retention, you're still going to have churn to get enough baristas through that, and to get them up to speed quick enough that these cafes, have a functioning, viable workforce. So consistency and throughput of well-trained baristas is a big challenge for a company like us. And that's an internal solution. Whereas a smaller company, if you've got, something where it's a one shop operation and you've got the founder in there and they're working with every team member, you don't have to have modules set up to communicate company values. You don't have to worry about more scaled, very, very systematic processes, because you can have that constant one-on-one interaction. The whole team is more accountable to each other, and you can have more of a bespoke training program, right? Whereas we definitely need a source of truth in terms of documentation for recipes and patterns and all those things. So for commercial training, those are some of the challenges that vary depending on the cafe. But ultimately, the edge there that's really wonderful is these people have skin in the game, right? They need to learn what you're teaching so they can do their job and feel successful at it. And you'll have them for a while. So you can go in depth, you can get beyond the basics, you can do more advanced education throughout the course of their employment. Whereas consumer training, this is a whole different thing. They, their ability to pay rent does not rest on whether or not they take away a solid pour over technique from your hour-long class. However, usually if they are attending oftentimes they're more excited about coffee than some of the staff members might be, right? It's a lot of people talk about how, oh, you have to hire the most passionate coffee people, and it's building a family, and it's like, well, it's not a family for everybody. For a lot of people, it's a job, and they may enjoy coffee, but they're not super fanatics about it. They just want to show up, do good work, feel proud of what they do, and then go home and be able to pay their bills. So, there's oftentimes different mindsets between commercial and consumer facing stuff. Consumers are excited, but it doesn't necessarily matter if they hold on to it as well. You don't have them as long anywhere near. So like consumer education has to be really sticky, right? It has to be like super engaging, almost edutainment to make sure people stay with you. And it has to be like fully encapsulated inside of those small options, because most of the time you'll never see those folks again. So you want to pour over classes just like the greatest hits of the high level stuff. You're not getting into, all right, well, let's talk about your water TDS and how to adjust coffee over age, or like variations in pour styles. Like you just don't, you just want them to get to like a minimum level in the time that you have them.
Just tapping on that a little bit, I think you mentioned educating consumers directly in classes, in like live classes. What about like online content and videos and all those things where like the self-service part of it? How does that play into the education?
Yeah, it's this is the new Wild West, I feel like. What online education looks like. There's a lot of people following formulas again, but it's just like, why are you doing it that way? Well, because I saw this company do it that way and that company do it that way. Like we don't have, or at least I don't have the analytics on this yet. There's the ability is there to really start to pull in some data around how this works. I don't know that it's filtered into coffee education in the most tangible ways. We have a lot of how-to content for people that is free on YouTube. Excuse me. And soon on our new website when we launch it to be more video capable. But it's like, in my mind, that stuff's there as like a kind of a follow along reminder guide, how to, where it's like, okay, this is how Blue Bottle does a French press. You put in this much coffee, you grind it this way, it's this much water, and that content's everywhere, from individuals to Starbucks, out there making it. And I feel like it's good and it's helpful, but it's really hard to get too far in that fashion, right? Because you're learning in a bubble. Now, if you are a really self-motivated person and you're great at these online courses, and you can really push yourself through it, I think there's a lot of opportunity. But I still think as an industry, we're struggling to find out how to make them as impactful as we want, in a way that's more than just sharing recipes and theories, but it's actually helping to develop people in the long run. And there's a lot of folks trying. Everyone loves Hoffman's content. It's awesome. But then there's also like, there's so much white noise, right? Like I don't have enough fingers and toes to count weird influencers from other genres who've just decided to make how to make cold brew DIY videos, and you watch some of it and you're like, oh no, and it has like 800,000 views, so I think there's a lot of challenge there in that, there's no third-party certification for posting YouTube video, certainly not for TikTok. So
what's the opportunity for a brand like Blue Bottle? You have a big following, you have a lot of coffee shops out there, and a lot of consumers who get in touch with that brand. So to
Yeah.
tell them, hey, if you use our coffee or if you use this specific coffee right now, this is the way you want to prepare it. So kind of you keep them in the Blue Bottle bubble, but also give them very targeted information, which might not work for any other roast or any other coffee shop. Is that a thing?
I mean, this is where I don't know. Maybe I'm just old and cranky. Like, I don't see information as being exclusive when it comes to brewing. Like, if you really love Onyx, and you love their coffees, but maybe you don't like their videos, you can watch our videos and make their coffee. It'll taste fine. Like, there's no that's one of the challenges, and also one of the amazing benefits. Like, coffee's open source. There's no, you can try, and like, we're a larger company now, and we're pulling in a lot of people that are needed to help scale an organization across countries around the globe. They're not all coffee people. They're finance people and marketing people, and people that have very valuable skill sets. But a lot of times they're like, well, what's a thing that only we can do? And I'm like, put our logo on a bag. Only we can do that. Everything else, everyone else can do, right? Like, you can't, there is no magical IP around brewing coffee that's specific to a company. There's the same with buying, same with roasting. Like, we all can get access to these amazing producers. We all can buy alluring. We all can, get a top shelf machine from La Marzocco, or, go out there and use a decent, whatever you're trying to do. Like, there is no exclusive edges I feel like people can buy, which, may frustrate some on that end, but it's truly exciting and magical for the world of coffee consumers, because all of this information just keeps stacking on top of itself to build a better and better experience for the world.
That's amazing.
So one thing that, speaking of, ways of brewing and like level of accessibility and whatnot, I am curious to know where you think instant coffee might have a role in that. And I ask that especially because, recently I was just in Colombia. They drink a lot of instant coffee there. And also my parents have recently been getting into instant coffee. And it seems like this new, I don't want to say new trend, but I'm noticing it more. And while they may not be drinking the instant coffee that I may prefer myself, I am wondering, for those who like that kind of like, that idea of brewing coffee, but would be interested in dabbling like the specialty side, I feel like there could be some sort of higher impact that we may not be aware of yet in the industry.
Okay, maybe there's one area where IP is important. It would probably be this, this range of instance and things. It's so hard to say. I feel like, it's in that sort of scary world of what does technology bring, because there is a future where you have like 92-point coffees that you can just take out a tablespoon of and put in the water, and then add 5 ounces, and all of a sudden it's the most delicious cup of coffee that money can buy that year. Like, the process for making instant hasn't necessarily changed to my understanding in leaps and bounds, but it is changing slowly. And one of the most important changes that's happening is that people are just using better coffee. This has just been the hugest shift. And I feel like, the guys at Sudden started doing it way back, and Voila was doing a great job, like just being like, hey, it's instant, but it's instant with this really awesome coffee from this great roaster. And it started to blow people's minds. Like, it still wasn't convincing your diehards and replacing their pour over program, but they were certainly taking it on the plane with them. using it camping and other places like that. And I feel like the ability to do great instant at scale is going to be a huge game changer. We have a tier of coffee at Blue Bottle that is our exceedingly rare line, our XR coffees. And these are like, they're just our top shelf exclusive lots. And we had a coffee from Yemen that we prepared, that was an XR coffee for us, that we prepared via instant, right? We did a small batch instant run with it. And that was delicious. It was a really, really delicious cup of coffee. Mm-hmm. You get longer shelf life, you get repeatability. One of the curses of coffee, but also, maybe an odd blessing, depending on how you like to think of it, is that, in some ways, instant is like a movie and pour over is like a play. It's a moment in time that you have to be there to experience, and it's going to be a little bit different each and every time. Whereas a movie, you know what you're going to get. You can get that same, you love it, you can get it again and again and again, and someone else can get it and you can talk about it. And you can do that with plays, but it's a different experience for each person, how it pops up in different cities and different performances, different actors. And I feel like as coffee professionals, there's, the dream of, oh yeah, technology is going to come and baristas are going to be like a sommelier. We don't have to focus as much on preparation. It's more about taste and communicating with the guest. That's really hard right now, given the organic nature and variability of the product, right? You can't say, oh, I've got this 2010 vintage coffee from Bolivia that was used in a world barista competition that's going to taste exactly like this, because you don't know how to make it taste exactly like that. Like, you can't preserve coffee as well. The water variations, the grinder variations, the pour technique variations, all of those things create subtle differences that make our ability to build a library of taste and smell much more difficult than any other, the spirit industry or the wine industry, right? Because those products have a shelf stability, and a bottle of wine doesn't taste different depending on how fast you pour it out. So they have that consistency. There's a world where instant potentially gives us that consistency as well, to create vintages, to create a common language that is allowing us to build something even greater. I think there are still a lot of challenges around getting instant to that level in terms of quality, but I know that we're trying. Other people are trying.
Maybe it could be a segue for people who come from the I need my morning fix. So they come from the caffeine side and then realize it can also be a taste experience, and then want to know more, and then go to a coffee house or buy better coffee, and then kind of get in, maybe into that a little bit more. I don't know, maybe that's just a romantic thought, but maybe it can be a reality.
That does, like, in that vein of thinking, it democratizes great coffee. Right now, to have a truly amazing cup of coffee, you either need to be in a major city that has a top shelf roaster cafe that can prepare it for you, or you have to invest a ton of money and time in building out your own setup, right? You got to use bottled water, and you've got to have a $1,000 grinder, and you need to practice your pouring technique, and you need to have the right filters, and you got to have a scale, and there's this huge barrier to entry to get that great cup of coffee. And there's people that would probably very much enjoy that cup of coffee, but don't have the time or the resources to go through those hoops. And, maybe they live in Tecumseh. So if we have a product that allows them to experience that great coffee, if anything, that just makes a much bigger pie for specialty coffee, for people looking to take a slice out of it. And it makes it more accessible to everybody.
Amazing thought. Yeah, I love it. I always love democratization, and I also loved your other thought on, and I heard Jeff Watts a little bit in that, like coffee is a public good in a way, and keeping it open. That's fantastic. Mhm.
Yeah, I also kind of want to go back to what you said though earlier of like, there could be a future of where we could take 90-point coffees and basically just pour 5 ounces in it and that'll be your coffee. But I feel like, and maybe this is being too optimistic or a generational thing, but I feel like my generation and maybe like late Gen Zers are kind of like re-romantics in the sense they like this kind of like, at least people I know like, the idea of preparing coffee, the experience of preparing coffee and enjoying coffee. So I feel like that future, maybe I won't see in my lifetime or maybe the end of my lifetime. But like I said, maybe that's just me being too optimistic. So I think it's fascinating though, what the future could mean for that.
Well, and this is, I think there's room for all of these answers to be right. This was something that like I got really excited about early on in my coffee career, when I was a barista in Chicago, working in this one cafe. And it's like, back then, 2007, 2008, like you knew every like if you were really into specialty, you knew a good chunk of the cafes across the country that were on your level, right?
Mm.
Like
Mm-hmm.
you'd be able to call out a place in Texas and 2 or 3 in San Francisco and a couple in New York, and like because there weren't that many, and most all of them were pretty similar. They back then they didn't have $1 million build outs happening with professional architects. They're all kind of scrappy. They all had a similar menu of espresso drinks. It was a very similar thing. And then so there was that tier, and then there was like diner coffee, and that was kind of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I could personally back then, my excitement was like, all right, this is just going to keep stratifying.
Mm-hmm.
There's going to be that, and there's going to be diner coffee, but then there's going to be much better grab and go coffees.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's going to be like the eccentric cafe that only brews siphon. And then there's going to be espresso only cafes. And then there's going to be places that only do cold brew. And then there's going to be places that only do instant. Like the market's just going to keep stratifying, and there's going to be people that, fill each one of those niches. So I don't think the idea of coffee made to order, brewed by hand is going to disappear. There's going to be people that, what they want out of coffee isn't just the final cup. It's the experience, the ritual, the meditative nature, all of those things wrapped into one. It's the community of people that are also working on it, trying to figure out, how to do that. Vinyl is not easy, but people still love vinyl now, in some ways more than ever, despite the fact that they also have Spotify.
Right.
So you'll find people that have invested $2,000 into their home coffee setup, but they also have some Blue Bottle Instant up in the cupboard.
It might be about the mood.
Yeah.
The mood. Yeah, that's how I am. It's got to be a mood.
Yeah, but I don't think anything's disappearing. I think if anything, we're just going to have an embarrassment of options for great coffee.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. No, amazing stuff, man. Appreciate sharing all your knowledge and experience with us today. It was very special, and really, really thank you for your time.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's a great honor to get to hang out with you folks and be a part of the good work you're doing.
Thank you, Michael. Fantastic.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Coffee and Technology Podcast. To learn more about Cropster, subscribe to this podcast and follow us on social media. For more educational content, visit cropster.com/learn.